right. Good afternoon. My name is Joseph Coleman. I'm hosting for this Rappahannock Community College voting information session for our students and local community. This is information session number 3, which will address voter suppression. I am joined by members of the RCC Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Voting Subcommittee. These are Ms. Karen Turner, Ms. Beth Robbins, Ms. Jill Quidlin, hopefully Ms. Abby Parsons. Some housekeeping rules up front. We're asking that all of our attendees will mute their devices so that the presenter can give her presentation uninterrupted. Today, most Americans over the age of 18 are entitled to vote in federal and state elections, but voting was not always the default right for all Americans. It took many years and constitutional amendments and legislation like the 15th, 19th, and 24th Amendment in the Voting Rights Act of 1965 to achieve this right. While no longer explicitly excluded, voter suppression is a problem in many parts of the country, as some politicians try to win re-election by limiting the number of specific populations of voters, such as African Americans. Today, this session will address voter suppression. We are happy to have Ms. Samantha Cain, who has agreed to speak to us. And I'm going to look at Ms. Cain's bio here, and which is very impressive. I had to cut it down a little bit, but it's still very, very nice. So I'm going to read a little bit of that, let her know her background. So Samantha LaJoy Cain is a trailblazer that stands between faith and justice. She has a heart to encourage marginalized individuals to navigate their own life stories in order to produce the greatest versions of themselves. In 2010, Ms. Cain graduated from Lancaster High School in Lancaster, Virginia, where she is a native and resident. She is a 2014 graduate of Christopher Newport University, where she earned a Bachelor of Science degree in cellular, molecular, and physiologically biology, while minoring in philosophy and religious study. Fantastic. She holds a master's of divinity degree from the Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology at Virginia Union University. Her work with the community allows her to play many roles, all of which focus on outreach, empowerment through education, activism, organizing, and dismantling systems of oppression. Currently, Samantha serves as an associate minister at the Community Christian Church, Warsaw, Virginia. There, she is also a founding board of directors, liaison, and founding member. Humbly, Samantha serves as president of the Richmond County chapter of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP. Samantha leads her chapter in focusing on voter registration and awareness through community engagement by hosting and partnering for voter registration drives and political forums. She serves on the steering committee for the Resource Council of the Northern Neck, where organizations meet the needs of the community, membership, and social justice. Samantha works to support the uplifting of oppressed and marginalized community drives and to intentionally give God glory for all that she is, and all that she does, because when people, the second page here, when people counted her out, God counted her in. But Jesus beheld them and said unto them, with men this is impossible, but with God all things are possible. It comes from Matthew 19:26. That's from the King James Version. And so with that, I wanted to hand it over to Ms. Cain and thank her for sharing her time with us this afternoon to talk about this topic of very, very important topic of voter suppression. With that, Ms. Cain, it's all yours. Oh, Yes, and if you have questions, put them in the chat box. We will address those chat at the end of the sessions. Ms. Cain.
All right, can you all hear me clearly? All right, good evening, everyone. I do want to take the time just to tell everyone thank you, Mr. Coleman, Ms. Karen, thank you all for extending the invitation for me to be with you all today to speak on this topic of voter suppression. And thank you for that introduction. So I really appreciate that. Just for a little while, I'm trying to share my screen again. So give me just a few seconds. And it's actually not letting me do that right now. Here we go. All right, and is my screen visible to everyone?
Yes.
So once again, thank you. So once again, this topic for this evening session is suppression, and this is, of course, is for the voting committee here at Richmond Rappahannock Community College. So thank you all once again. Just to give a brief outline of what we'll be going over this evening. First, we'll have what is voter suppression. We'll go over a little bit of the history, which Mr. Coleman just gave you, how you can recognize it, tactics to use, to suppress voters, tactics that you may see in the local community, and then what we can do as voters, what we can do as citizens within the community, and how we can speak out against voter suppression, or what we can do to counteract voter suppression. Here we have what is voter suppression. Voter suppression is any effort or tactic used to discourage people from voting. It's the barriers that keep people from voting. It's methods that are used to make it harder for individuals to cast their ballot on the day of voting or even beforehand. The goal of voter suppression is to manipulate political outcomes. The result is it severely messes with the democracy that doesn't reflect the will of the people overall. And typically, voter suppression affects the African American communities, the Latino communities, those racial minority groups. It affects poor people, young people, and older people. So it aims. So what voter suppression does, it aims to keep out those that may not have the education or may not be the right type of voter. It aims to keep those voters away from the polls. It aims to discourage them not to vote, to think that their vote doesn't count, or to think that their vote does not matter, or that their voice even doesn't matter. So that is what voter registration, that is what voter suppression is. I'm sorry. Just to give once again a little bit of the brief history of voter suppression. The 15th Amendment to the Constitution in 1870 was an amendment that gave African American males the right to vote. After the Civil War after the Civil War, there were rules that came in, or laws that came in, such as the Jim Crow laws, which Mr. Brent, I'm sure you talked about in our history classes growing up. Probably should have paid more attention then. But they had the Jim Crow laws that were implemented specifically in southern states. They implemented things such as poll tax, literacy tests, and the grandfather clause that would keep African American males away from voting. So they would implement poll tax. So when individuals would go to the polls to vote, they would have to pay a tax before they could vote. And most likely, those African American males that went to those polls, they were discouraged from casting their ballot because they didn't have the funds to pay those taxes. For African Americans during that time, just coming out of slavery, or even still in slavery during that time, they had to pass a literacy test. And for African American males, a lot of them could not read. So once again, if they couldn't pass that literacy test, then they were unable to vote. Many states also had the grandfather clause that just meant that they didn't allow those African American males to vote within those particular states. Then, as you see, there's a picture in your lower right-hand corner, and this picture comes from the March on Selma. This March on Selma was specifically because of voter suppression. They were speaking out and marching against voter suppression. And during this March on Selma, and during this march in Selma, they were marching to get this Voter Rights Act passed, the Voter Rights Act of 1965. And if you know anything about this march, then you know that those that were marched, they were presented with violence from the police forces. They were presented with violence, and that violence was also a tactic to keep individuals away from the voting precincts. And this is something, sadly, that we're still seeing, and these are still tactics, sadly, that we're seeing still here in 2020. And many of these Jim Crow laws have been implemented in a new way here in 2020, because the Voting Rights Act, the Supreme Court, they voted to get rid of, or they voted to invalidate some key parts of the Voter Rights Act of 1965 that allows for these tactics to be implemented today. And we'll see what some of those tactics are as we continue on throughout this conversation. One of the things that they asked me to present on is how to recognize voter suppression. And I cannot emphasize this enough. Know your rights. If you're going to be able to identify anything that is wrong, our first resource is to educate ourselves. Within 2020, you know, we have a lot of resources here at our fingertips just by having our cellular phone, our computer devices. So it's not hard to go to, you know, whatever state you're in or wherever you are. It's not hard just to go to virginia.gov or any local, any state websites that could give you information to just know your rights and what to expect and what you may see when you go out to the polls. And it's okay to ask questions to your local leaders. So the biggest thing I would say in order to identify voter suppression is to know your rights, know what to expect when you go to the polls, know what is okay and what is not okay, know what is acceptable and what is unacceptable when you go into these polling precincts. Tactics used for voter suppression here in 2020. The main tactic that we see is photo ID laws. And I'll just read over these quickly and I'll kind of go back and give more information on them. But one thing we see as voter ID, the acceptable forms of identification that we have to take with us as we go to voter precincts. Also, we have closing of polling places or our polling precincts. And that goes into the location and the time in which we see. Also, we have the purging of voter rolls. We have the rejection of absentee ballots. We have the restoration of rights, and we have voter intimidation, poll watching. And we definitely will go a little more into detail about that. But for voter ID, acceptable forms of identification. Here, we may not even think that voter ID would be such a big deal, but this heavily affects the African American population as well as the younger and older population and the poor population as well. So those minority groups that we were speaking of. So even getting an ID, there is a cost to getting an ID, which makes it hard for those that are in underserved communities. Not only that, but in order to get even a valid Virginia driver's license, a lot of times you have to do a lot of back work just to get those acceptable forms of ID, such as your passport, your driver's license, or whatever is that acceptable form in your state. And for Virginia, those are two acceptable forms. But you'll even have to, get your birth certificate before you can get your driver's license, or you'll have to get your birth certificate and other documentation in order to get your passport, in order to present those. And with those things comes a cost. And if you're in an underserved community, then you do not have the resources in order to even pay, because then you have to kind of weigh the options. Do I want to pay my electric bill this week? Or do I want to pay to get an ID so that I can go vote? So that's one of the main tactics that we see now. Next, we have the closing of polling places. With COVID-19 being in this season, this is one that we heavily see, specifically in the Richmond County area where I also service and where I know RCC has a main campus. So this, for the November election, there will be one polling place that will accommodate 3 precincts. So there will be one precinct that will be accommodating 3 polling places. So this is a tactic that they're using to implement within this season of COVID-19. And I put down time and location to speak about during the polling places. So one thing is location. So for especially our older citizens, it's already hard enough to get to the polling precincts when they're in their local communities. Now, when they move them outside of their local communities, it makes it even harder for those individuals to reach it to the polls. Not only that, but the times in which polling places are open. Now, I know for Virginia, most of our polling places are open from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. However, in different states, they fluctuate the time. And if you work during those hours, it makes it hard to reach those polling places. So you have to make sure you have enough time even to go to register to vote. In different states, it's considered a holiday. In some states, it's not considered a holiday. Some people have the day off, some people don't. So that also plays a part in just having enough time to reach those precincts in order to vote. Another thing that we see is purging voter rolls. Now, this is something that was even new to me that I had never even realized was a big thing. So even in the time that we are preparing for election and we are emphasizing voter registration, there are individuals that have been registered to vote for years. But each time we're getting ready to vote, there are a list of individuals who have registered, and then they have to go through that list and take off those who are deceased or those who may have become felons or anything in that time. But also, while they're purging those voter rolls, they also sometimes take off names that are still supposed to be on those rolls. And this heavily affects the African American community as well. So our names are being purged from voter rolls when they're really supposed to still be there. So it's always vital to double check and to recheck that you are even still on the roll to register. So if you even go on your local registration website, just to make sure your name's still presented on those rolls before the day of election, that's also a vital key. Rejection of absentee ballots. We know that a lot of people are doing mail-in ballots during this season, especially with the pandemic going on, because we don't want to, be out and about or just gather around large groups of individuals. So so for us, we're in a smaller community, but in those bigger states in cities and things like that, there are major issues getting absentee ballots sent to people in the mail, but not only getting them sent to individuals, but also when they're being placed in the mail. So this year, we've definitely seen the U.S. Postal Service, they're having civil suits filed against them because those absentee ballots aren't making it to their voter registrar's office. So different tactics are being used even with the mailing, not only to receive those absentee ballots as voters, but also making sure they get back into the right hands to make sure our votes are being counted. The next thing is the restoration of rights. This is a tactic we see with those individuals who have been incarcerated, who may have minor offenses that have gotten them a felony and a felony charge. And if you have ever tried to restore or help someone restore their rights, this is a very daunting and a very exhausting task to get your rights restored. It's a lot of paperwork, it's a lot of phone calls, it's a lot of follow-up to get those rights restored. And I do have information if anybody wants or anybody needs that to share as well. But getting your rights restored as a felon, instead of maybe, implementing a law or anything that may have automatically generate those rights to be restored. That's not something that we have here. So that's something that we want to look at as well. Restoration of rights for those that have been incarcerated, especially due to minor offenses that have gotten individuals felonies. And just to speak on that for a personal note, I'm even back here in Louisville, Kentucky, where I was arrested as a part of the Louisville 87, speaking out against justice for Breonna Taylor. When we were arrested back in the early part of July, we were actually charged with a felony and 2 misdemeanors. And for us as those individuals, for those 87, most of individuals that are a part of grassroots organizations and things like that, the first thing we thought about with a felony charge was, are we going to be able to vote in this November election? So that's something, and thankfully they did drop that charge, but that's something that even speaking out against injustice that put on our record that could potentially keep us away from using our voices in the arena of voting. And that's a major thing that we are in our communities advocating for. So that's even a tactic used during this season where we're speaking out against racial injustice and things like that. So so charges for felonies for minor offenses are even things that we're seeing implemented in today. And the last thing I have here is voter intimidation. And this comes in the form of poll watching. If you all are familiar with poll watching, oftentimes there is a representative from each political party that is able to go into those precincts and just kind of make sure everything is going right, making sure the candidates' names are on the ballot and that all the information is presented to those who are voting. Oftentimes they do get to speak out if they see something going on within the voting precinct that is not right. They do get to speak to those individuals that are running that precinct and allow them to know, something isn't right. However, this is also a tactic used to discourage the vote during this season because many of those poll watchers, they're actually not supposed to speak with voters directly. They're not supposed to, in a sense, harass voters and be so direct and push those political candidates on voters. But oftentimes, depending on your precinct, they do. They also will, if they see something going on, they'll hold up the lines, especially in those larger cities. They'll hold up lines so that people can wait in lines for hours. And they'll say that they're advocating for the voters when in fact they're actually just implementing some more of these tactics to cause suppression for those local voters. What can I do? And maybe, I think I'm going a little bit faster than 30 minutes, Mr. Coleman, but we'll have enough time for questions and answers at the end of this. But what can I do? How to be effective within your local community? I believe I stated the first and foremost when I stated that we need to know our rights. But the first thing we need to do also is educate not only ourselves, but to educate others. I cannot push that enough. Educate yourself, educate. That comes from, reading even history books to see where this voter suppression started, to, just Google questions that you may have about voter suppression or anything that you may have that's going on with your local community. Don't be afraid to ask questions. There are no dumb questions. If you have a question, you're unsure. None of us are really experts. We're all, trying to be experts. We're all trying to give information, but none of us are experts, and that is okay. So it's okay to ask questions when there's something that you don't know. But also, don't keep this information for yourself. Share information with other people so that they too can become educated and so that they too can become aware. The next thing is to volunteer. I've learned a lot in this season just by being present in those spaces where, political candidates are speaking, being present at moments such as this, being able to not only present, but sit in these spaces to be able to listen to what's going on. But not only that, volunteer to work at your local polls. I texted one of my best friends today and I asked, hey, are we going to volunteer at the polls on November 3rd? You know, what can we do to make ourselves present, especially as young adults within our rural communities, in our local communities? A lot of young adults don't think that their vote matters. But what does it look like for us to stand in those spaces, for us to speak to our peers and to let them know your vote does matter? What does it look like for us just to be, just to be in those spaces and for people to see, hey, other people my age, other people that look like me are doing this. So volunteer at the polls so that you can have representation at the polls as well. Check and double check in order to, kind of get in front of this voter suppression. One of the things that I said was, to make sure that you are on those voter rolls. Make sure your name is on those voter rolls. Make sure they have you accounted for. Don't only register or take it for granted that your name is, because you registered one time, that your name is still going to be on the roll. Check and double check. Like I said, Google is your friend. All you have to do is Google voter registration in Virginia, and it'll pop up either register to vote or check your voter registration status. This is vital because you want to make sure your name is accounted for so that you will have no problems or limited problems during the day of election. Mail in your ballots. If you have requested an absentee ballot or if you have an absentee ballot sitting at home on your counter, do not hold on to it. Once you get it, go ahead and vote and get those sent out. Get those sent back to the local voter registrar so that your vote can be counted on the day of election. Not only that, as a part of education, I do want to state to know the important dates that you have within your state. So for instance, Virginia, and I want to just give these out very briefly, voter registration deadlines. The voter registration deadlines online and by mail is October the 13th, which is coming up next week. Absentee ballots, have those requested by October the 23rd and send those back no later than your voting day on November the 3rd. If you're going to return those in person, November the 3rd, no later than 7 o'clock. So you have until your polls close. Early voting started in Virginia on September the 18th, and that goes until October the 31st. But whatever state, someone may be in, just let them know to be aware. I'm in Kentucky, so I didn't even know that their early voter registration was over, or early voting was over on yesterday. So just knowing how the laws change or differ between state to state, but definitely since we're in Virginia, those are important dates to know. So make sure you educate yourself and others. Have a plan. There was supposed to be a little card right there. I'm not sure where it went to, but have a plan on the day of voting. Definitely know your precincts, know the area in which you vote at. There may be long lines, so have a plan if it's going to be cold outside. Make sure you're dressed for the weather. Make sure you may have a chair, especially for those that may be elderly or may be disabled. Have a chair so that you can be comfortable. Have water and have snacks. I was even, educating my own self on Georgia in the last presidential election. Some individuals stayed in line from 3 to 6 hours. Thankfully, we don't have that issue, in our local communities because we're not that large, but 3 to 6 hours is an entire work day for many of us. So make sure you have exactly what you need so that you don't get discouraged. So the next part I have is stay. Allow time to vote. Allow time to make sure you have enough time to get in line, to get comfortable, to be able to cast your vote. Do not leave out of line. That's another tactic that they use for voter suppression, is to make you stay in those long lines, to make you tired, to make you worn out so that you can get discouraged and you can get out of line. But I cannot force it enough. Stay in line because your vote, we need your vote during this season. So stay in line. Don't get discouraged. Don't give up. Stick with it. And this may sound like, a life thing, but voting is just that serious. So it is. The next thing I have, what you can do is communicate. communicate with your senator, communicate with your local representative. You can call your senator, you can call your representative, you can email them. If there are different forms of voter suppression or a law that you are against or a tactic that you are against, let your local representative know so that they can kind of, or even advocate, do your research and join different groups. If you do your research, there are different groups that are already out there doing this work. They already have connections to your senator, to your local representatives. So if you can join them and you can advocate and you can let other people know the work that's going on within your local community, so that we can have those changes implemented. Once again, if you go online, you can always find different groups. You can find the Women's Voters League. You can find the American Civil Liberties Union, even your local NAACP chapter, which I have the privilege of serving in. So if you have some laws or you have some rules or you know that something isn't right in your local community, then please do that. Not only online, but you have, social media is a big thing. If any of you are sports fans, today I didn't even know that they had started a campaign called More Than a Vote. So on social media platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, for the, my generation or for younger generations, or Snapchat and things like that, they do have these different platforms where you can use your voice and you can become informed and you can know what's going on in your local community. Last but not least, what can you do? You can vote, 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 vote. I cannot say this enough. These are voter suppression tactics that are used within our community, but stand strong. Don't get discouraged. Stick with it, because like the NAACP, they have a platform that they're using now. Our lives literally depend on who's in our political offices. So if you have a problem with what's going on in your local community, your first vote, or your first form of action should be you getting out to the polls and voting. A lot of times we tell individuals you can't really say too much or you can't really fuss too much if you did not do your part to get out there and vote. Your vote is your voice. There are different campaigns such as Rock the Vote. During this season, a lot of people, especially with this big presidential election coming up on November the 3rd, there are several platforms that are really being vocal about getting out there to vote. So this is a serious matter. It's not one that we want to take for granted. We want to make sure individuals in our communities are first registered to vote. If anybody needs their restoration of rights, their rights restored in order to vote, we want to make sure they know the individuals to go to, they know the places to go to, have those contacts and resources, so that they can get their rights restored, so that they can make their votes count. For those individuals that are coming specifically into RCC this season, that are just hitting that 17-year, 18-year mark, that will be eligible to vote. We want to make sure that they are newly registered, that individuals within our community have rights to vote. So that's one of the things that the Richmond County chapter of the NAACP is implementing this year. We want to make sure we're giving away free rides for those individuals that don't have accessibility, those individuals who don't have transportation to get out to the polls. We want to make sure everybody has every resource they need in order to cast their ballot on November the 3rd for this general election this year. So I can't emphasize enough. I believe that's the end of my PowerPoint, but I want to end it again with vote, 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 because our vote and our voice does matter.
Very good. So thank you very much. I agree that my thoughts are that if voting wasn't important, folks wouldn't do so much to keep us from voting and go to all these great efforts to keep us from voting if it's not important or if it's not critical. So I very much appreciate what information you just provided. So I'm gonna, Ms. Quinlan, are there any questions that are in the chat box?
There aren't any currently, but I have a question about, so I mailed my ballot in this time. And I was a little hesitant to do that because the mail system, it has slowed down and I was just nervous about it getting there. So you had mentioned, like, is there a way to, did you just call your registrar's office to make sure they received it? To make sure that they got it, your ballot?
Yes, so you can call your local registrar's office. There should also be there should also have been a scan, I believe, something that you can kind of track, a way that you can track, but you can call your local registrar's office to make sure they have received your ballot.
Okay, I don't recall seeing the scan, but there were a lot of instructions. But we got through it, so that's good. I triple checked.
And that's something that they tell individuals. I'm sorry. If you can get a tracking number when you send your ballot back, then that's something that you can do to make sure.
That's a good idea. Okay. All right.
I have one question.
Oh, go ahead. I don't see any more. I don't see any questions in the chat.
Okay.
So maybe we can just have an open.
I didn't put it in the chat, but I figured I'd just ask.
Okay.
Do you know what voting polls in Richmond County are being merged? I guess you could say they're closed and you have to vote at one precinct.
So I know specifically, I believe, and there are some other Richmond County residents on here. I know that 3 of them are, so there's typically one at the Communities Christian Church, right on 360. And so there are 3 precincts that will be moved to the local high school, I believe. And I don't have those names. I'm so sorry. I do have the information, but not those.
That's okay. I'll find out. I'm just going to let everyone know because I went and voted 2 weeks ago at the registrar's office in Warsaw. So I voted in person.
Okay. And I can find out that information and get it to you as well.
Good afternoon, Ms. Cain. I have a question.
Yes,
I just first of all, really enjoyed your presentation. Thank you so much for doing that. I wish we had 100,000 people here because it needed to hear what you had to say. So my question is, I didn't even realize until you just said that about the emerging voting precincts. I didn't hear anything about that. So I'm sitting there thinking a lot of people, you know, like I have friends who work in Richmond and we go to the same voting and it's probably one of the ones that's merged. I live in Essex County. So, you know, they may get there 6:45 thinking, hey, I'm fine. And then they find out, hey, they're closed. What? You know, and then they're running around in the last minute. So are they going to put something out or how would people even know? Like, I didn't know until you just said something.
So you can also go to the Virginia website and check on your polling precincts and they will give you that information as well.
Okay, great. Well, I, you know, did that. Now, my other question is some of us, like Ms. LaVere said, I voted last week too, early. And are those ballots correct? Or are there other things that may be added? Because people were asking me, like, is the school board, like the local elections, is that happening this year? Because all I saw was national, you know, elections, the presidential elections, and then the, I think, Senate. Yeah. And then a couple of laws they wanted to change or enact or whatever, but that was it. I didn't see anything local. So people were asking me about that. I said, you know what? I don't know.
So you all should have received the same ballot that you would have received going into a precinct. Now, there will be, depending on where you live, I know the town, if you live in a specific town, you'll have maybe an extra vote, an extra question versus you living in the county. So that's
okay. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
So I have a question. For someone who wants to restore their voting rights, is it too late for them to try to do it now for the November election?
It is never too late.
Okay.
It's a daunting process that may take beyond that time. But please, 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 if anybody needs their rights restored, no matter when they need it restored for, go ahead and with that process and, you know, just stay on top of them because it is a very daunting task.
And then how do they start the process?
I can email you the information.
Okay.
A couple of steps that you'll have to take, but I can email you that information.
Thank you so much. And you did a wonderful presentation, Samantha.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And I echo what Karen said. Wonderful presentation, and Lorraine, what they both said.
I've just put in the website, I'm pretty sure all of you have it, but the elections.virginia.gov website, there you can check your local precincts. If your precinct has changed, you can check to make sure that you're on the voter roll as well. You can check all your information. You can register individuals to vote on that website as well.
I have a question about the voter roll. So when I went to register, they they had, I guess, my name and information they have to verify, and I showed my driver's license and my voter registration card. So if someone is not on the roll, will their information not be there when they go to vote, or?
That is correct. And if their information is not there, that means they have been removed from the roll, and they need to go to their voter registrar's office as soon as possible.
Okay. The other question I had, you were encouraging the young people to go out and to vote. Go out to work the polls. Do they do that for free? Is that volunteer, or is there do they get paid for that?
It's volunteer. Yes, ma'am. It's volunteer. Now, I wish we could pay, or they could pay individuals, but it is on a volunteer basis.
Okay. Thank you.
And another thing, I just
want to say that.
I just wanted to say that
I'm sorry.
Guys, taking your time when you go into the polls, when you go into vote, take your time to read through. Don't let anyone rush you. Take your time to read through what's being presented before you. I did have someone reach out to me last week that said that the presidential names were not on their ballot, but she kind of looked at it again, and I showed her the what is it, can't find my word. Can't find my words. But I showed her the layout of what it should look like prior to. So once she saw that, she said, maybe I just didn't take my time. I was rushing and I didn't look through it. Because I did see Democrat and Republican. I circled, or filled in which one I wanted to vote for, but I didn't see the specific names. So please take your time and make sure you read those, because specifically for Richmond County, or, even with Essex, I know we get a complaint. The individuals in which I even report to are going to be right on it. They're going to be, at the polling places. So before we get anybody on it, before we go and protest, and before we go and speak to those individuals, please make sure you take your time to read through your ballots.
Any other questions? I just want to say that the voting committee at RCC has on their rappahannock.edu/vote, we have a lot of the information for our students, a lot of information that that you mentioned on that site, so they can go out and check if they're registered, and various information. So it'd be nice to, I guess, maybe coordinate with you to find out that maybe we're missing some information that maybe needs to be added. So maybe I'll reach out to you to ask what the information is that we could share with our students.
Yes, sir. Please do.
So basically, I want to thank you once again, and I want to remind everyone that the last day to register to vote is October 13th, which you already mentioned. I think if I looked at the countdown clock today, I think we've got 27 days. I think it's 27 before November 3rd. I think that's right. Let's see. And unless there's some other additional questions, I'm going to end with this. I found this. It says, participating in election is one of the key freedoms of American life. Many people in countries around the world do not have the same freedom, nor did many Americans in centuries past. No matter what you believe or whom you support, it is important to exercise your right. So I want to encourage everyone to go out and exercise their right to vote, and take heed of the wonderful information Ms. Cain has shared with us this afternoon. And I want to thank her once again. And if there are no other questions, we'll close out this information session. Yes, Ms. Cain.
I'm sorry. To answer, I believe it was Ms. Levere's question. I don't know if this means much to you, but I asked which voting precincts had moved in Richmond County to the school, and she said 101, 201, 301. She says, so 401 at the Farnham Fire Station and 501 at the fire station on County Road. So those precincts have moved. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does. I always vote early or I vote in person. So, but I need to let my mom know because
Yes,
I
ma'am.
think she's going to vote early in person as well now.
Yes, ma'am.
And we need to let as many people know as possible because I haven't seen any advertisement for it. And I'm going to assume that they're not going to announce it until close to election day. So people will have to scramble to get to the polls.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And I've put my email in the chat. If anybody would like to email me or any resources I can provide, then please let me know.
Thank you very much. Any other comments? Once again, thank everyone, especially Ms. Cain, for helping us out this afternoon. And this session will be recorded and put on the RCC website so that we can share with those who did not attend. And once again, thank you very much, and everyone have a great rest of your day. Let me see if I can stop this thing here.